Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE, GMAT, and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE exam. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, a built in study planner and machine learning essay grader, and full length practice exams. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like our GRE course, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today, we've got Travis Morgan from MBA Whisperer with us. And Travis, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and your company.
Absolutely, Tyler. Yeah, great to be on. MBA Whisperer, I do both test prep and admissions consulting, primarily for MBA programs and business schools, with a little smattering of other programs as well. And so it's kind of an end to end. I often start working with people on their test prep. We have a great time together and work together. Many of my clients, I just continue working with them on admissions consulting as well, but I'm happy to work, with just one or the other um, for individual clients, depending on their preference.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and you were telling me earlier that you're pretty clued into the trends in the MBA admissions world nowadays and just graduate admissions in general. And so I'm curious kind of what are the big things? We're now halfway through 2024 filming this. What are kind of the big things that are coming up right now in the admissions universe, right?
Absolutely. So, in fact, I just got back not long ago from a conference of top business school admissions directors and admissions consultants. This year's conference was based in Barcelona and Paris, but we had US schools and European schools, people from all over the place. I'd say the number one trend that we saw from this past season is a huge increase in applicants. Huge. Yeah. Some
Hmm.
schools reported 30% increase over the year before. And the year before was not a slouch either. I mean, we saw increased, higher level applicants, a huge spike at the beginning of the pandemic, settling down a little bit, and another big spike right now, which of course makes it very competitive. Yeah, if you've got
Mhm.
30% more people that you're competing against, then that does make for a very competitive landscape.
Yeah, exactly. But it seems, oftentimes these things seem to be correlated with like the job market, particularly in the white collar industries, right? And I know, at least personally from my own like LinkedIn feeds, that, there have been quite a few layoffs in the tech world. So I wonder if that has something to do with it.
I think it's 100% correlated. Yes, we say it's business school in particular, but grad school more broadly tends to be countercyclical to the
Hmm.
economy, particularly the white collar economy. And I've got friends out there right now that are calling it a white collar recession. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's tech, but it's other finance and consulting, and a lot of folks a lot of industries are pulling back right now. And when companies pull back on jobs, we tend to flee the economy and take a little break for a couple of years and hope that the job market's going to be better
Right.
when we graduate, which, quite frankly, is not a bad strategy. so,
Right. Yeah,
um,
it worked great for people that went and got their MBA in 2008, right? By 2010, everything was fine.
that's right. That's right. I mean, so it worked. It worked. Yeah. I got my MBA in 2009, so it was just the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Well, great. So yeah, that's sort of trend number one. I mean, do you feel like that is affecting the fact that there's so many applicants is affecting like the test optional universe at all, or do you think it's still mostly test optional?
I would say that the two probably are not directly correlated. So, we saw a big rise in various forms of test optional, whether that's, test waivers or being able to apply so a test waiver meaning that the school grants you a waiver so that you don't have to take the test before you even apply. Other schools have little variations on that. So, for example, some schools you can apply without a score, and only after evaluating your candidacy will they tell you whether you're or not you get a waiver. And if you don't, then you've
Well,
got to
that
hurry and take the test, or you're just not going to be considered. So that's kind of an awkward one in my opinion, but it is
That
out
sounds
there.
pretty awkward. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of strange, I would say. But in any case, those really rose particularly during the pandemic. And during this same conference, actually, we asked about that and said, "Hey, what are you seeing?" And because they are just now getting maybe 3 years of data on that, they're
Mhm.
only just now analyzing. They just now have enough data points to be able to see, is there any sort of correlation between test waiver and your academic performance in the programs. And so we have actually not from any of the schools have we heard back from them on that. And I think that actually is going to be a key driver as to whether these schools continue their test waiver policies. And I
Mhm.
think other schools are going to be looking at that to see, if the schools come back and say, actually, no, we're not seeing, that the students are doing any worse academically. In fact, maybe they're doing better or whatever. That data comes back as we might actually see policies expanding in the future. I'll be curious.
Yeah, I mean, in undergrad, it is coming back that test optional applicants are significantly worse academically than their peers who did submit test scores. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes out.
Right.
But yeah, it sounds like the the universe hasn't changed, right? I assume if you're going to a top school, you still probably want to submit your test scores. But you still have the option not to if you don't want to.
Right. So it's only a small handful of schools on the grad side that ever went test optional,
Mhm.
and for those schools, I say, like, if you're studying for the exam and your practice exams are coming in way below the school's averages, absolutely
Mhm.
you should apply for a test waiver. And if you're granted, you should take it. It is an advantage
Mhm.
in the application process than having a low test score. This is primarily due to rankings. And so if they admit you with a score that's well below their average, that's going to impact their ranking. And so they now have to admit a whole bunch of people with a score higher than their averages to balance you out. And so they have to love you if you. So
Mhm.
the rule of thumb that I used to give under the old GMAT scale, it's going to be pretty close on the new GMAT scale. Is if you are 35 points or more below the school's average, you're going to be in the bottom 10th percentile of that class. And
Right.
so, yes, 10% of people are admitted with 35 points or more below the score, but they're bringing something that is just standout that absolutely no one else can bring to that class. And that's not me, and it's not most of you. and so, um, and so I say, yeah, if you're going to be more than 35 points below the school's average, a test waiver is going to be better for you than submitting an exam score that low.
Right. Yeah, and at the end of the day, like the way to think about this is to think about it like an admissions officer, right? Like everybody who's applying to these schools are good, right? Like it's not like you versus a guy who's working at a car wash. Um, and so it's a matter of like, from their perspective, do you think they want your score in their pool? That's kind of the
That's right. And in
way to
fact,
think about it.
the quote that I continue to use is from a former director of admissions at Wharton who said 75% of the applicants that we receive to Wharton are qualified to attend Wharton. 75%.
Hmm.
I mean, and they can't admit
Hmm.
anywhere close to 75%, right? So,
No.
your whole goal is you first of all have got to be in that 75%, and then you've got to emphasize those differentiators of what do I uniquely bring to this class that nobody else is going to be able to bring? What mix of experience and skills and background and etc. But if you're not in that 75%, like that's just an easy no.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Well, great. So, I mean, what other trends or things you wanted to talk about on this episode? Like, what's next?
right.
I got a couple in mind, but I want to hear yours first.
Sure, I'll throw out a couple, and then yeah, I'm excited to bounce back and forth a little bit. One that we're seeing is so a big hot topic, as you can imagine, across the admissions directors is the use of AI. And
Hmm.
so the use of applicants' use of AI in their applications, the admissions folks' use of AI in their screening of admissions of applications, AI in the classroom, and of course AI in terms of career aspects. In terms of like your career goals and things like this. And so this was a very hot topic this year. We touched on it last year as well with the admissions directors, and there were opinions really wide across the board. Like there were some schools that said the use of AI is against our honor code. If we discover that you've used AI, it's like an automatic deny, that sort of thing. Last year,
Mhm.
some schools all the way to we don't care, use it. I mean, it's a tool just like spell check or grammar check or anything else. Use it however you want. Like, yeah. So there was a
Right.
really wide range last year. This year, it seems to have, now as we're starting to understand the capabilities of Chat GPT and other services that they're offering guidelines, but the expectation is that many people will be utilizing AI at some point in their application process. And the schools have realized that, hey, we're using it in the classroom, we're using it in business. Why would we prevent people from using it in their essays and things like this? So it is for
Mhm.
most schools allowed, but you do want to see their guidelines on what they are suggesting, recommend. Well, more than a suggestion. What are they saying that you may and may not use it for?
Right. Well, and I think it's also like what the advice that I've given on other episodes where we talked about this is basically like if you were going to use AI in school today, what would you do, right? Rule officially, you can't submit an essay written by AI. So don't just use the AI to be your brainstorming tool and then write it in your own words, right?
Exactly.
That's the easiest way to solve most of these problems. And I mean, you know, I'm not advocating this, and please don't take what I'm about to say as official advice, but like if you do it that way, no one can tell probably because you are writing it, right? Like
Right.
the AI can just kind of help you with the structure and maybe like help like for me, if I'm using it to write a blog post or something, it usually helps me think of things I haven't thought of, right? But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's just like the actual writing of it is kind of easy to spot when you have looked at it for a while. And I'm imagining that admissions officers have seen a lot of essays in their lives, and certainly I've seen probably a lot of AI written essays in their lives. So just don't have the AI write it, right?
Yeah.
Let the AI do the brainstorming for you and then write it yourself.
And this is a real challenge when English is not your first language, right? Because you're like, oh, I
Mhm.
want it to sound great. The problem is that so I work primarily with people applying to business schools and adjacent programs, and it, in the words of a former Harvard Business School admissions director, applying to business school is not an essay writing competition, right? Yeah. So
Mhm.
they're not looking for essays that are, in these, this perfect language, in, beautiful, poetic, whatever, and so the AI generated essays, A, tend to be too generic, and
Mhm.
B, are honestly too flowery. Like, the language is not straightforward enough. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, it's easy to detect, and they will compare this to your interview. And if your essay is just in perfect, beautiful English with all of these words, and then you go into the interview, and it's very clear that this same person could not possibly have written that essay, they'll know. Yeah, and so
yeah,
it actually gives you a huge disadvantage. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that makes sense. What other trends did you have in mind? You said you had a couple.
Yeah. So another one, kind of along the same lines, is I don't want to overstate this, but a little bit of less emphasis on the essays themselves, recognizing that there are these other tools that are going to help people to write the essays and things like this, and so utilizing other forms of gathering information. Most notably,
Mhm.
this would be what are sometimes referred to as video essays. but just little short form videos, and even just little short form writing within the application form itself, just little short answers here and there, are becoming more and more prominent in the application and in the application review. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, years and years and years ago, it used to be that you wrote like 6, 7, 8 long essays to these schools, and I mean, now it's very clear that that is not the case, and it's becoming even more and more the trend, I would say. We're seeing shorter um, word counts
Hmm.
and less emphasis on these big, long, flowery essays.
Well, it's so funny to me because, on the one hand, Mark Twain said, "Sorry that I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one." And you
Right.
can argue that shorter is harder, right?
Hmm.
It's harder to get your point across in less words. On the other hand, it feels like just another way that all of these schools are trying to make the process easier, right? Like, they're essentially, test optional is a great way to get more people to apply to your program.
Hmm.
Making your essays shorter is a great way to make people apply to your program or make it easier for people to apply.
Right.
So it does feel like there's a little bit of like sales and marketing motivation for this too. But at the end of the day, if it helps the applicant, right, because the essays they're asking for are not monoliths each time, then maybe it doesn't matter why they're doing it.
Yeah, there is a balance here. I will agree that writing a very short essay is extremely difficult, actually. Yeah,
Yeah,
really, really difficult. And we've actually tried to convey that to the schools as well. It's like, listen, we think you're giving the applicants a favor here by having these 100-word essays, 200-word essays. You're not. It's really difficult to
a
write
hundred
these things.
words is really short.
Oh, unbelievably short. Yeah. And yeah, there is a school, Michigan Ross, that had just only 100-word essay. I mean, it's like they got almost nothing. They've said that they are going to be pretty dramatically changing their application this year because I think they got very little information out of this. And how do you
Hmm.
decide amongst these applicants with such little information? I will say
Yeah.
on the flip side, though, Tyler, is that video essays or little 1-minute
Right.
videos, or they're terribly unpopular with applicants. They do not like them.
Oh, interesting. Because
Yeah,
I was going to say that feels like the future to me is
yeah,
video
yeah, yeah.
applications.
But there's a lot of pressure on it, right? I mean, again, if you only have 1 minute to say something, that's not very many words either. And if you don't feel like you're particularly good on camera, then you feel like you're at a distinct disadvantage. And
Right.
so it's not popular with applicants. They get very nervous about this. They tend to over prepare for these things, and then they get even more stilted in the videos than if they were just to kind of chit chat like we're chit chatting here today. And so they don't like them. And yet the schools, I think, are moving more and more toward that, and for good reason.
Hmm.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they should maybe then not do like 1 minute prepared video responses to questions, which I understand why that would freak people out, and you have a lot of propensity to over prepare for that, and maybe just do video interviews, which is another trend.
Right. Yep. And many of the schools are going to exclusively Zoom interviews, so that they're not
Hmm.
advantaging or disadvantaging anybody. Others are still meeting as many people as they can in person, and then those that they can't, they're doing virtually. But I'm curious to see where that trend shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice because, if your goal is to try and be as inclusive as you can be in the application process, being able to make it so that people can just show up on Zoom and not have to like take a plane flight to your college for the interview. I think that makes a lot of sense. And also, we're all on Zoom all the time anyway, so
Right.
like I feel like people are kind of used to Zoom interviews now.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it would be interesting to see if that trend continues. Right. I mean, at the end of the day, part of it is like, what do MBAs want to be in the world? Right? Do they want to be the like the cream of the crop of the business world, the elite, right? Or do they want to be more inclusive and trying to be an education that anyone can get that'll help them, right? So that's an interesting, I don't know, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, yeah. I think the top MBA programs are more interested in being elite
Yeah.
than they are in being broad. Yeah.
Well, then for being elite, I would say, those groups might stick to the in-person stuff more, right? Because they want the forcing function and the filter of like who really wants to be here, right? Like who's going to shell out 2 grand or whatever to take a weekend and come visit our school.
Depends on how you define elite, I would say. Yeah, but the schools are very, very clear, and I think it is true, it's honest, that they do not advantage people who do an in-person interview over someone who does a virtual interview. So it is not worth
Yeah,
your
yeah.
$2,000 plane ticket to fly all across the globe to try to do this, in-person interview while you're jet lagged and all of this. Like, no, they will they do not consider that an advantage. Yeah.
hmm Well, that's great. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So then, what other trends are there that you have that you
I
wanted
was
to
actually going
discuss
to
today?
bounce it back to you, Tyler. Yeah, like
Well, no, you already talked about mine, which was video. I
ah,
think video is the big trend that I'm curious about. And then yeah, I mean, I think other than that, like that was kind of the big one. I think
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
in the episode that we recorded prior, we talked a bit about like GRE and GMAT. It seems
mm-hmm.
like the business schools kind of weight those equally, so just take whichever one's best for you. But
Yep,
that covers most of the things that I wanted to discuss today. I think we got good
sure.
coverage on things.
On the testing front, though, I will say, we talked a little bit about test waivers, and that is, um, the schools that have it seem to continue to have it. There's very few schools that have sort of swung back to not utilizing it. Um, I'll be curious to see if they do once they start seeing this data come in, if more schools pull
Mhm.
back on test waivers or if it actually expands. We'll see. But interestingly, the use of the executive assessment in full-time MBA admissions is something that is gradually but is expanding, and that one little tip I'll give you on this is that currently U.S. News and World Report, which is the ranking that most heavily uses test scores, in fact, one of the only ones that uses test scores, and they only currently anyway, I don't know what they're going to do in the next ranking, but currently they only use GMAT and GRE scores in the ranking. So if you submit an EA score to the school, it does not count toward that school's ranking. And that's a huge advantage if you are struggling on the test. Like as long as you can get a good enough score to show that you are going to be able to academically succeed in the program, they don't have to count the score toward their ranking. And it's a really nice, way for folks who are scoring below the school's averages to get in. And we're starting to see this more and more. Duke even publicly announced that they have about it, the business school, Duke Fuqua, one third GMAT, one third GRE, one third EA. It's a huge percentage of people who are
Yeah, that's
applying
surprising.
with an EA. It's one of the top ranked schools that's accepting it. I'd say the highest ranked schools are Columbia, Duke, and NYU Stern are the ones that are accepting it for their full time MBA programs. Lots and lots of other programs accepting it for part time and exec. But yeah, it's a growing trend for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Travis Morgan from the MBA Whisperer. And Achievable has a great online GRE course that you can try for free by going to achievable.me. And if you like it, use the code podcast to save 10%.